So I'm making this video to show you how to build your own portable gaming table with a screen inside it. I built the table this way to be portable so that I could set it up in my living room, tear it down, put it in my garage. I designed it so that I could tear it down and put it up because you don't need a gaming table as a dining room table, which you can buy those and they're like thousands of dollars. I think I've spent 350 bucks on my table total. It wasn't too hard to build it. I'm going to show you step by step how I did it. Hopefully you can build one yourself. I'll also put all the components in the comments section underneath the video. If you like this video, go ahead and like and share it for other gamers that you know, that tabletop gamers that want to build it at home. I am going to add one piece to it, which is a little thin board to go over the screen so I can put regular board game boards on it and play it that way. Here we go. So first thing I did was I've got a 40-inch TV. It's a Hisense 40-inch HD television that I'm going to use for the screen. And I've put can't see it, but I've put a cloth underneath this to protect the screen as I laid it on this board. And now I have built a 2x6 frame that goes all the way around it, and all I did was I laid down the boards up against here. First one, measured it, cut, and then just framed the initial frame like that. And this is going to be the base for which I use to build the rest of the table. I've also marked which way is up, which in actuality it's which way is down, because this will be the bottom of the table and this will be the top of the table. But for our building purposes, I wanted to mark it that way so we could keep everything straight. Now what I've done is I've cut down some 1x2s that'll go, I'll tack them on with my brad gun so that it's flush, and so I don't have any showing screw holes or anything like that, because this is going to be a piece that'll be seen. So I want it to look nice. I'm also going to later route it, so I'll get to that process later. These are also measured to cut as you can see, all the way around. So I cut a piece of plywood that is about 4 inches longer on one end than it is on the other end for the television box. So this piece of plywood also measured out a hole that I'm going to cut in the middle of it, because it's going to slide up onto this up to a certain height, and then it's going to be shored up with 2x4s. Piece of MDF I've cut that's going to go on top of the plywood, that's going to slide in two pieces to make the tabletop. Okay, day 2 of the build. I'm taking my time with this because I'm a public school teacher, and currently all schools are canceled, so because of COVID. Stay safe, folks. Wash your hands. So I've got the last bit here. See how I've cut this piece of plywood to fit nicely down inside this. So eventually, when I get the boards put on to frame this up, it'll go up. Now what I've done also is I've given a little bit more room on one side, because the DM requires more room to put all their books and whatnot on this side of the board, and I'll make sure that that frame goes all the way out almost to the edge of that to keep that up. So next step is to put on the 2x4s. Okay, I misspoke. Before you do the 2x4s, here's what you need to do. So I've cut that piece out that's going to be the base for the table, of which this MDF sits on. Okay. However, because you're going to cut this
piece of MDF, you got to cut a hole out as well, okay, for the MDF, and you're using this as a jig or to mark it so you can cut it, okay. What you want to do is you want to lay this down on top of this and draw out your hole for the MDF. But before you do all that, MDF is kind of precious. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and set your base, and I haven't really measured this out yet, but you want equal distant on this side, that side, and this side with that side. Because whenever you cut this in half, because you're going to have to cut this MDF in half and make kind of U-shaped pieces, you're going to want to make it so that the center cut, where you cut this in half, is right in the center where your screen is going to go. Because otherwise you're going to have too much. If you cut it directly in the middle, you're going to have not enough on this side to hold this together better. I just think it's neater if the pieces are right in the center of the screen. That way you've got the same amount holding both sides. So I'm about to measure this and cut this MDF to fit. One thing, now that I have it marked, one thing you need to take into account is when you cut this in half, it's going to take a little bit, just the width of the blade out of this. So if you try to butt this up on the table, you're going to have that little gap. So to prevent that, you cut on the outside of this line, and you may need to shave it down a bit to get it to cut together. And I'm sure there's another carpenter way to do it. I'm not a carpenter. I'm just, and if you have another way to do it, post that in the comments, please. You expert carpenters whom I highly respect and have been consulting, but since of COVID-19, I'm not able to talk to anybody or have anybody over to help me. So this is my attempt. I'm sure it'll work out. All right, so I've cut the two pieces, and unfortunately, my poor carpentry skills didn't butt this up perfectly, but that's good enough for me. I think the felt will be, once I put the felt on it, it's going to be all right. So what I do next, since here's the inside frame where the TV goes. This is upside down, by the way. This board is going to be the main board that holds everything together. What I'm going to do is press this down a little bit, not terribly too much, because what I'm going to do is mark this to put my 2x4s all around the edge to make my frame, and my frame is going to come out all the way almost to the edge of this on both sides, so that I can, and then I'll attach the legs here. Haven't quite figured that out yet, but I'm going to get there, and once I do, I will put that in the video. All right, here's a little tip. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting a frame to shore up this board all the way down so it'll hold up. However, you've got to leave room for your plywood and for your MDF. So I have drawn a line. I've put the MDF under that, and then I held it down, pressed it down, not heavily because you need a little bit of wiggle room because you're going to have to slide that in. But as you can see, I've got a line that runs along where my 2x4 needs to go. All right, and I've shimmed this up so that when I screw this in, it's going to be on that line. It'll be easier to hold it up because I'm kind of working by myself out here. So as you can see, I'm going to make sure this, I'll put 2 screws in it to get it good and level on there, and then I'll screw the rest on. So what I've done now is I've framed out the bottom, and I cut these at an angle, kind of making where you wouldn't bust your knees on it. And I want to flip it over and screw this board down to the frame. So I flipped it over just to see just to check the fit. I slid the pieces in, and this is what the top looks like without the trim on the outside. Of course, the screen goes in here, and I'm gonna make some nice little leaf vine facing along this with some little square pieces and stuff. So it's coming together. This will all be green felt. And inside, as you can see, it's really sturdy. It's a nice. I'm going to clip these two together with some cabinet clips, so they kind of go together and snap together once it's snug together. And we'll see. That's the next step, is to screw the plywood down to the frame. I'm just going to show you something, the little goof I made. So when I hammered this flat, I started with screws, but they don't, unless you do pilot holes, they don't tend to do very well and don't work, and they'll stick up and they'll scrape the bottom of your board. But this has been nailed pretty flat. So I brought out the old finishing nailer and boom, 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 knocked it in. Now, one thing that I did run into was this right here. I had to get in this at such an angle that it kind of stuck up, so I used this punch to go ahead and tap them on down smooth. So now I've got a nice base for my table. You've already seen the topper that slides together in two pieces. So now I'm going to start working on the legs. So here's my next step. Making these little platforms for the legs that are also going to help to shore up the table a little bit more. What I did was I bought this little jig here. It's about 20 bucks. I'm going to leave the link for it in the comments below, space below. But what you do is you make this little jig, and you have to get these special screws, about $6-7 for these, and you anchor them down into the board. And then this is what I'll screw my leg brackets on. And these legs, of course, will screw off. They'll detach really easily, so you can store it later. So now I've taken the legs off. And what I'm going to do next is one of the final pieces, which is to lay the television down inside this with plexiglass over top. Now, in order to get it flush so that it's not, sticking up and you have problems, I put a piece of cardboard down from my TV box just to kind of give it a little bit of depth, so it'll go down a little further, and then I'm going to trim it out with some decorative facing when I'm done. But so next thing is I'm going to lay this plexiglass down, and it's still got the plastic on it, so it doesn't. And this will give me an accurate depth, so that whenever I put the screen in and I put the frame in, it'll be correct. So now I've carefully set the screen down inside there, television, on top of the plexiglass. And what I'm going to do is frame out some boards for this to bolt to, so that it'll be, when I flip it over, I'll set the TV down inside there again, and then that way it should fit where I've done. Alright, as you can see, what I had to do is measure off of the edge of the console right here, and be sure that what I'm going to do is drill some holes right here for my HDMI to go through to the DM, but make sure your ports are on the side where you can reach them and access them. It just depends on the TV as to how you're going to frame this in. You might want to go a board across this way if the ports are down here. You might want to go this way, but I'm also going to put some boards in right over here on the corners, just to kind of make sure I get this thing good and seated in there. So whenever I put the TV in on from the top, not bolting it in yet, but you got to make sure your holes are lined up. Because of this one I kind of screwed up on, but the washer will cover a multitude of errors, whatever. So what I've also done is I've put some little frames on a little bit of framing support on the outside corners, and I'll put one in each corner just to kind of make sure I have a nice seat for my television whenever I set it from the top. So here's a lovely little decorative bits that I put on here. Nice little ivy vine growing around the outside. I'm now going to sand all this down and put several coats of polyurethane on it and make it nice and durable so it'll last a long time. Alright, so I've learned some stuff since last I shot my last shot. It's been a couple days. I had some things to do. But I've got the plexiglass installed over the top of the screen. And what I did was I used, also I've put a pretty heavy coat of polyurethane on this to give it kind of a sheen and protect it for a long time. I've also done the same thing with my cedar pieces that I put around the outside of the main playing area. You'll notice I've drilled some holes in the ends of this. Now I did have some latches and I didn't really like the way they turned out. I didn't think it was good and snug. It was kind of like, you know, uneven. So I put these holes in because I've installed these metal pins that go in the ends so that whenever I install it, I put them together, they'll just snap together. Just an added piece, if you'll see underneath the table how this is bolted on, it ended up being a little crooked and I had to adjust it a little bit, but that's fine. That sometimes happens. TVs aren't exactly straight. But these are, I'll put this as a list in the description. These are M6 metric bolts. They're number 10 and there's lock washers on them. And they're pretty long, so they're long enough so they'll go through this board and into the back of the TV and mount it in there. What I've opted for latches underneath are these neat little things that are just like $1. But you know, they've got a nice little locking thing where you come undone and you can take it apart and stow it away. Couple things just for fun. Make sure your screen works. I test it out to see if it works. Mine does, so it's good. After fiddling around with it and fitting it in here and all that stuff, it still works. And make sure that if you get it one that has one of these sensors, leave some room for it so you can. But you know, look at here. Player's handbook fits nicely right here. Player's handbook fits nicely there. And of course the player's handbook's going to fit on the GM side because he's going to have plenty of room for his screen. And then player's handbook fits nicely here. So I've done my job. The next step is to put felt on this, green felt. But you can top it with whatever you want. Some people use neoprene. I found felt to be the cheapest option. And it kind of looks nice. It gives it that gaming look, you know, that gaming table look. So that's going to be the next step, and then I'll be done. So on cutting the felt, I have laid the felt out on here, and around the edge I've cut with a fabric knife. It's like a wheel knife. It cuts really well through this stuff and leaves a nice clean cut. So now what I'm going to do is mark my line and cut around here, and then I'm going to trim this up. I'm going to use fabric glue to glue it down. It's really good industrial strength stuff, so spray on, so it goes down pretty quickly. So I sprayed it down with glue, and I also used my staple gun, handy dandy staple gun, to staple around the edges just to kind of make sure, doubly sure it doesn't come up.